You have found why we are Christians. My name is Kent Philpott. This is actually the third program with Rich Robinson. And we've looked at a lot of things about his life. And we're going to talk about what he's been doing fairly recently. And he works with Jews for Jesus. Could you give us, Rich, a little bit about how you got involved with Jews for Jesus at first?
Well, about the time I came to faith in Jesus, so 1973, Jews for Jesus was already existed, not as a formal organization, that didn't happen until the next year, but there was still a group called Jews for Jesus in California. I didn't know about them. But what I found is in a local Christian bookstore, they had little miniature copies of the full-size brochures that we hand out that we call broadsides. But they were like scaled down to this and put out by the American Bible Society. I thought they were great. And then I found a book in the Christian bookstore. I don't know if it was 73 or 74, but it was called Jews for Jesus. And it really gave the history of that movement up until that time, because it really was a movement before an organization. It was written by Moishe Rosen, who founded Jews for Jesus, and sort of just detailed his journey to starting Jews for Jesus as a group and the different people that were involved early on. And I said, this is wonderful. This is really good stuff. And it really resonated with me. I mean, the people involved back then were young people. I related to them. And so I first got to know about Jews for Jesus that way, but I didn't officially get involved till I went to Trinity Seminary near Chicago, which was in 1975. And we just had opened a Chicago branch there, maybe 76 actually, I think. Not sure.
A branch of what? Jews
we opened
for
up
Jesus?
a branch of Jews for Jesus in Chicago. I found out about that. I said, I want to get involved. And so I ended up sort of being a student worker during my time at Trinity. Got involved in the local activities, participated in one of our evangelism outreaches in New York. And that was really how I got my foot in the door with Jews for Jesus. When I graduated in 1978, I played piano, and I did that for some of our events in Chicago. So when I graduated, there was an opening in our music group we had at the time. The group was called the Liberated Wailing Wall.
I knew everybody in Liberated Wailing Wall.
You would have known them, Kent, yes.
Yeah. Well, I have to stop. I met Moishe in 1968, come to my house for Bible study. My daughter was one of his first secretaries, my oldest daughter.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
Small world. So we had this music group going, and they needed a piano player. So I ended up playing piano, but I don't sing. Well, I didn't back then. I'm kind of better now, but I sound like Bob Dylan with a cold a lot of the time. So I just did the piano work for them, traveled for several years, and that was my initial ministry time with Jews for Jesus. That went on for a few years.
Okay. So we saw Jews for Jesus expand. Moshe and I used to do demonstrations in Berkeley, in San Francisco. We had a lot of fun, a great deal of fun. Now, what are you doing right now with Jews for Jesus?
Well, right now, after having worn a number of hats over the years, right now I'm the senior researcher in San Francisco. And what that means is that I do editing work, writing work, research work. You say, what kind? I've written a couple of books.
We're going to get to those.
We'll get to those. Right now I'm involved in a lot of the work that goes into the content on our website. I field questions from people about theology and Bible, and I write papers that are given at conferences, just a whole range of things that sort of go into the behind-the-scenes undergirdings of a ministry like Jews for Jesus.
And you work out of the home office
in San Francisco, the international headquarters right there on Haight Street, the famous Haight Street, the opposite end from the famous end, which was Haight-Ashbury, and now I'm down.
Almost at Market.
We're almost at Market Street, that's right.
Yeah. expand it a little bit about what's going on around the world.
Well, we started just as a North American movement with branches in several cities, but beginning like...
Now, what's a branch?
A branch is where we have an office in a city like Chicago or New York or Los Angeles or San Francisco, where we have staff that just bring the gospel out to the Jewish community. They may be on a college campus, they may be downtown. They visit with Jewish people who are open to hearing about Jesus. They hand out literature. They have outreach events. And basically, they exist to be a vehicle for telling the Jewish community in that city about Jesus.
And confrontational, I remember. The broadsides, handing out the broadsides.
Moish was very big on the word confrontational, and in some ways we still are. We get out there. He meant it in the sense that you're confronting someone, you're opposite them, you're communicating to them, you're talking to them. You're here, I'm confronting you.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a negative thing, it's not an aggressive thing.
No.
But I'm confronting you with the gospel. Here's some literature. If you want to talk, let's do it.
Right. The gospel is essentially offensive in a lot of ways to a lot of people.
Well, who wants to hear that they're a sinner who needs salvation?
Yeah, that's right.
I'd rather go to Hawaii, but that's not reality. Started in North America and in the 80s, and then especially from the 90s on, we went internationally. We've got branches now in about 14 countries around the world, including the former Soviet Union, Ukraine, and Russia, France, England, South Africa, Australia, and above all, we focus on Israel.
Israel.
Because half the Jewish population in the world almost is now living in Israel, and it's growing. So we've got a branch in Tel Aviv with a ministry outreach center called the Moish Rosen Center. And this has been just a fantastic way to minister. So we're in a trendy community in Tel Aviv called Florentine. And we have developed relationships with a lot of the people in that community. Give you an example. About every year, we organized a project in the Moish Rosen Center. Now, background. When Israelis get done with their army service, and you've got to do army service from like 18 to 21, then a lot of the people, once they're out of the army, they go tooling around the world, especially to places like India. And there are whole communities in northern India that cater to the Israelis who come through. They're busting loose, they're exploring spirituality, and a lot of them, unfortunately, get into a heavy drug scene, but they're also open to talking about the gospel. And we've sent teams there to minister to them, relate to them, maybe even meet with them back in Israel. And this is in northern India, Thailand, Nepal. The biggest Passover Seder in the world is in Kathmandu, because that's where the Israelis are. So What we did back in Israel is we have a photography exhibit every year called India Through the Eyes of the Traveler. And people in the community, whether they believe us or not, can participate, submit their photographs, put it up on the wall, and we have a whole photography exhibit. This year, we had more people than ever come through from the community. We're talking Jewish Israelis, not tourists. These are the people who live there. About 600 came through to see the photography exhibit. And while they're there, they're going, so this is from Jews for Jesus. What is Jews for Jesus? We talk to them. And we share the gospel.
Now, what about Muslims in Israel? Is there any interchange, any confrontations?
I don't have first-hand knowledge of that.
Okay.
But I do know that, of course, Muslims make up about 20% of the Israeli population. So I'm sure when our guys are out there, they're interacting with Muslims as well as Jewish people.
Moish Rosen.
Moish Rosen is a very memorable person to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite memories, it was 1976. We were having a big evangelism campaign in New York City. Bicentennial of the country, so we called it Operation Birthday Cake. And
who comes up with this stuff?
I don't know who came up with that. It was a larger campaign than we've ever done since. There was like 80 people involved, which is really too many for this kind of an outreach. But long story short, I went with Moish. He's doing his clothes in the laundromat. And the laundry's spinning around. And Moish says, "Isn't that wonderful? The laundry's spinning around." And I said to him, "Do you like machines?" And he gave me a look and he said, "I like life." That stuck with me.
Yes.
I was thinking machines. He was thinking the life of the clothes just going around with the motion and the colors. Great memory.
We knew him as Martin at first.
Yeah.
He was living in Denver, American Board of Missions to the Jews, and he was formulating Jews for Jesus and visiting back and forth. I remember that. Big man.
He was.
Brilliant.
Yes.
Brilliant.
Brilliant communicator.
Oh, great communicator.
He revolutionized the field of Jewish missions. How do you communicate to the Jewish people? You know, when he first started Jews for Jesus, now I was not one of the original people, but I think I've got the story right. You know, he had been working for another mission at the time, and he ended up out here in San Francisco, where, you know, he realized that the literature that people were using to speak to the Jewish community was grossly outdated. It was speaking to a Jewish community of 100 years ago, the immigrants, the religious Jews. The Jewish community was no longer like that. It's less like that today, but it wasn't like that either in the 60s and 70s. So he just, you know, tried something new. And that's where we came up with the idea for the broadsides. I mean, Moish was experimenting. I think the first broadside ever that he wrote, you know, it's like a trifold, so you see the cover, you have to open it up to read it. It's a little interactive that way, you know.
Sure.
And it was called A Message from Squares. And it was addressed from a square, Moish, to the hippies. And it resonated.
I remember the broadside. I think I probably handed out a few hundred myself.
It resonated, you know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it was great. We loved it.
Then we did others like Jesus Made Me Kosher.
I want to get into your book.
All right.
All right. By the way, the president of Jews for Jesus, David Brickner.
The executive director, that's right.
Yes, I know David, a great man. Now, this is written in 2008, Moody Publishers, Chicago, called Christ in the Feast of Pentecost.
We co-authored that. We alternated chapters. He did one chapter, I did another chapter.
David Brickner, and you.
In churches, and my approach is really to show that, well, Pentecost is really a Jewish holiday. In the Old Testament, it's known as Shavuot, or the Feast of Weeks. Jewish community still celebrates it today. In the New Testament, in Acts chapter 2, it's known by its Greek name of Pentecost. And so that was originally a holiday where you brought the first fruits of your crops to God. But as the years went on, it developed another significance. It became the birthday, the celebration of the birthday of when God gave the Torah to Israel on Mount Sinai. And this is something that I like to bring out. In Acts chapter 2, you've got all these people gathered, Jewish people from all the nations around the Mediterranean. They're in there. They got their first fruits. They brought them in on oxen with ribbons on the oxen's horns. They're there to go to the temple. And what do they see? They see the disciples there are speaking. And they're speaking each in their own language. It's like if you're from Greece, it was in Greek. If you were from Egypt, it was in whatever Coptic or Egyptian, whatever they spoke back then. And they're going, what's going on here? Well, it turns out there's a legend about the giving of the law on Mount Sinai. It's not in the Bible, but you know, Jews like legends, stories, folklore. We always have that, and we like good food on the holidays. But this is a legend, and the legend says that when God first gave the law to Moses, he offered it to the other 70 nations of the world in their own language. In their own language. They all turned it down, legend says. Only Israel accepted it, so they got the law. Well, that's not exactly how it happened in the Bible.
Right.
But was this legend later or earlier than Acts chapter 2? I mean, I can imagine that it was already in some people's minds. And when this happened, they thought to themselves, wait a second, we've got a story that sounds like what's going on here today. The story is how God gave his revelation at Mount Sinai and all the nations heard it in their language. And now we're hearing these followers of Jesus in our own language. And also we're seeing, like it says in Acts, tongues of fire over their heads and a loud rushing noise. Just like at Mount Sinai, there was lightning and thunder. So maybe some people were thinking to themselves, wait a second, this is like Mount Sinai all over again. Maybe this is something we need to really pay attention to. And as it turns out, a few thousand Jewish people came to faith.
And got baptized in the same day.
Yeah, but wait, there's more.
Wait, there's more.
So also there's another story that King David was born and died on Pentecost, on Shavuot. In his sermon, Peter starts preaching on this very day about King David. He says, King David's dead and buried. We know where his tomb is. But his descendant, Jesus, rose from the dead. And if that was in the people's minds, what a perfect connection. I mean, just great communication going on. Take what the people are thinking about and move with that into talking about the gospel. Jesus did that over and over, and so we try to do also, just like he did. Now, I don't know how much more time you want to take on this book, but there's also the whole idea of the first fruits, because the New Testament
go
idea.
ahead, Rich. We got time.
The whole New Testament picks up that idea and kind of puts it into a spiritual cast. The idea of first fruits is used numerous times in the New Testament. It says Jesus at his resurrection was the first fruits of those who sleep. So like a farmer plants a crop and gets the first of it out. If it's a good batch, he knows there's a good crop coming along. Now, I'm not a farmer, but I think that's how it works. I mean, I'm from Brooklyn, New York. We don't do farming. The wildest animal I saw growing up was a pigeon. But, I think that's how farming works. You get the first of the batch in, and then it's like a promise that, hey, the rest will come along. So when Jesus rose from the dead, that was the first fruits. That was a promise from God that we also will eventually rise, we who follow Jesus. So first fruits there. Then Paul, when these people come to faith in Jesus in a given neighborhood, he said, so-and-so and so-and-so, they're the first fruits of Christ in the area called Achaia. First believers, he called them first fruits. He expected more to come along. Well, what else can we say? Paul says that the Holy Spirit who dwells within us is the first fruits of what is yet to come. And people see Christians, when they're acting as Christians should act, that is a promise and a visible sign that one day a fuller redemption is going to come. So this whole idea of first fruits moves from take the first fruits of your crops and kind of goes into a new key in the New Testament that as true as that was for the farmers, there's also this principle that applies to our spiritual lives.
Rich, thank you for that. Now, here's one that was just a few years ago, also Moody Press.
Yes.
2014. And this is Christ in the Sabbath. Christ in the Sabbath. Now, tell us what you're doing here, Rich.
Well, that book is basically an attempt now to show how Jesus relates to the weekly Sabbath. And there's so much in the book. I talk about Sabbath in the Old Testament, in Jewish traditions, in the New Testament. Let me zoom in on a couple of things. One is that the Sabbath is the day of rest. And that's where the rabbis have their 39 labors you're not supposed to do. It's basically a humanitarian day, a day for contemplating God. And it was given to Israel for two reasons. Number one, to remember the Exodus from Egypt. Once you were slaves, now you're free. So here's a special day once a week to really solidify that freedom, to rest, and to remember that you're no longer slaves. The second reason is because God created the universe, and it says on the seventh day he stopped his work. Mm-hmm. And he stepped back and he said, isn't that good? I like that. So two reasons why it's a day of rest. New Testament Jesus makes the statement to a bunch of people who are probably pretty weary and burned out in some ways. He said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." And he was promising to offer to his people the blessings of the Sabbath. He personified the Sabbath in that way. He was going to give us ultimate rest. There's a whole theology of rest. I can't get into that. It's in the book. But that was one thing he came to do. And as he was doing that, he was always moving the people to really understand what the Sabbath was all about. Jesus was an observant Jew, but he didn't always like all of the traditions that were being handed down. He wasn't against tradition, but, some of the traditions he felt didn't quite capture the spirit of what God intended.
Mm-hmm.
So, he healed people on the Sabbath.
Work.
Well, it was considered work in some of the circles
Some considered
there.
it so.
And there's actually, I don't know if this was written humorously or not, but there's a story in there where people come to Jesus on the Sabbath to be healed at the synagogue, and one of the synagogue officials says, "Come back another day. There are 6 days when you can be healed. Come back another day. The office shouldn't be open today." But Jesus healed, and people took offense. Some people, others were grateful when they were healed, and Jesus said, "Look, what was the Sabbath given in the first place? Wasn't it given as a day to rest and be restored and be made whole after a long week? And, besides, if you have an animal and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, aren't you going to pick it up? So how much more should we treat people that way?" And he kind of zeroed in on the full meaning of the Sabbath.
Wonderful work. I love that. I love that whole emphasis, and often speak about it. Now, you have here in our closing few minutes, which we have plenty of time to get to it here, and you state, "I've just completed a book entitled The Day Jesus Did
Tikkun Olam.
Tikkun Olam, Jewish Values and the New Testament." Now this it's not been published yet.
Not yet. Soon.
Okay, soon. Moody going to do it or who?
I don't think they will. We're not sure yet.
You're not sure. So tell us about this book. Now this is an incredible title. I got to hear about this.
So Tikkun Olam is an expression that literally means the repair of the world in Hebrew.
Repair of the world.
Today it's used as a shorthand for doing deeds of social action, social justice. It's really big in the Jewish community, especially among the non-Orthodox. The Orthodox believe in doing good things. They don't believe in calling it Tikkun Olam. But everyone else calls it Tikkun Olam. And you go, you help the community, you plant a garden, you work for prisoners. That's all Tikkun Olam. And the synagogues are very big on this type of activity. And some churches are calling it Tikkun Olam for their own activities also. So it's a big word out there, big idea.
First I heard of it.
Yeah, well, you can Google it and find out a lot of things. What the book does is talk about how Tikkun Olam is one of many Jewish values. And see, Jewish people, here's the thing. We may disagree on God. We may disagree on how to live your daily life. We may disagree on how to keep the commandments, whether to keep the commandments. But one thing that all Jews agree on, whether they're secular, non-religious, Orthodox, is a certain set of Jewish values. Honor your parents.
That's
hospitality.
Jewish values. Yeah, okay.
Jewish values. Honor your parents. Show hospitality to guests. Do tzedakah or charity. And Tikkun Olam. Do social justice. So in this book, I go through a number of Jewish core values. And it's written very conversationally. Hopefully a lot of good scholarship undergirds it, but it's not an academic book. It's really written for Jewish people who are open to hearing about Jesus in the New Testament from a Jewish point of view. So what we have is we go through each value in the Old Testament. maybe in the Jewish tradition, and then show how it carries over into the New Testament itself, so that the New Testament also reflects the same Jewish values that are rooted in the Hebrew Bible. It's a Jewish book. A Jew should read it for that reason. I'll give you an example. One Jewish value is avoiding what's called lashon hara, evil speech or gossip. In the Hebrew Bible, you find commandments like do not speak ill of so-and-so. It starts there. Jewish tradition comes along, elaborates it a little bit. There are different types of evil speech or ill speech. And from there, I move into the New Testament. I go, you know what? It talks about that in there as well. This is a Jewish value. Why is the New Testament talking about Jewish values? Because it's a Jewish book. I'll give you another example, another Jewish value. It's kind of a pair. Kiddush Hashem and Chilul Hashem. That means sanctification of God and desecration of God or His name. And it really means acts that we do that reflect on who God is. If we do something good as a Jew, that reflects on the God of the Jews positively. If we do something that's not so good, it doesn't reflect well on Him. Example, Alexander Rodriguez, A-Rod, baseball guy, right? He did some things that were not good. Can I actually open up to that and read you a little bit of this?
Okay.
Because that would be the easiest way of not messing up here and remembering properly. Actually, it's not this. You'll have to edit that out. The book isn't in front of me.
You know what, Rich? I appreciate that. We've come to the end of our program here, and I want to thank you for being with us and telling us about these books and the new one that's coming up. Help me with pronouncing it. Tikkun Olam.
Tikkun Olam.
Tikkun Olam. We'll be looking for that, Rich. Thanks for being with us.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks,
and
Kent.
we wish Jews for Jesus, pray for their ministry and your personal ministry too. All right, we've reached the end of our program, Why We Are Christians. Be looking out. You might find some other interesting stuff coming along to you with this program. All right, so long.